Well, welcome to episode 4 of season 3 of the Movies of Happenstance, formerly known as the Movies of 1985, formerly known as the Movies of 1999. My name is Jason Hutchens, and in this podcast, what I do every month is I select one year from the last 60 years or so and talk about 8 movies from that year that I've never seen before and maybe never even heard of before. It's been pretty good so far. We started the year with 1970. Then in February we did 1975. And in March we did the year 1980. This month it is April, so we are doing the year 1985, which is going to be challenging because last year I did the movies of 1985 and I watched 52 movies from the year 1985. So I'm going to have to find 8 movies that I want to watch from 1985 that I haven't seen before. Now, in the introduction there, we played snippets from 8 songs that were released in the year 1985 just to set the scene. Those songs were Money for Nothing by Dire Straits, Take On Me by a-ha, Raspberry Beret by Prince and the Revolution, Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears, Running Up That Hill, Kate Bush, Into the Groove by Madonna, The Power of Love by Huey Lewis and the News, and Don't You, Forget About Me in brackets by Simple Minds. Really feels like 1985 when you hear those songs, but also, about half of those have a strong tie-in to a movie from the year 1985. Which is interesting, isn't it? Because we didn't really see that much in the previous years. And you can see that, Hollywood really is setting the culture these days. I was 13 years old in 1985. I grew up with these songs and these movies. But I'm not sure whether, looking at the way that Hollywood's taking over things after enjoying 1970, 1975 and 1980 so much. I mean, I discovered a lot of wonderful movies by watching movies from those years. Let me just go to my Letterboxd. I haven't got anything open, typical me, and I'll just go to my Movies of Happenstance list, which you'll be able to find in the show notes. Yeah, watching movies such as, let's have a look from previous months, The Long Good Friday. That was a really great movie. I enjoyed that. Dog Day Afternoon, that's a movie that I should have watched 25 or 30 years ago, back when I was watching Taxi Driver and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It was great to have an excuse to watch that. Mirror, the Tarkovsky film, just absolutely amazing. Hadn't even heard about it before starting this podcast. Same with Jean Dillman, that film from Belgium. Just wonderful. The Mexican film El Topo blew my mind, not to mention all the other ones, such as in Investigation of a Citizen Under Suspicion and 3 Days of the Condor, The Stuntman, Raging Bull, of course, The Ninth Configuration. So many wonderful movies that we've seen so far this year that I wouldn't have seen otherwise. So it's been pretty great so far. Now, before I dive into looking at movies, let's just go through what's been happening in the news in the year 1985. So Ronald Reagan began his second term in 1985. He was 74 years old, making him the oldest president ever at the time. He won a 49-state landslide election in late 1984. Mikhail Gorbachev became General Secretary of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union. Let me see. Those two guys, Reagan and Gorbachev, late in 1985, held a summit in Geneva, bringing them face to face, where they issued a joint statement declaring that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. 1985 was the year of the spy. We saw a long string of espionage arrests with Russian spies infiltrating the CIA and things like that. One of the worst years for international terrorism, with lots of hijackings and terrorist bombings around the world. I won't go into those in much detail. We covered a lot of them in last year's podcast. There was a massive earthquake in Mexico City, a magnitude 8.0 earthquake that killed over 10,000 people. The Ethiopian famine, of course, and we saw USA for Africa in response to that with We Are the World being released in early 1985. In South Africa, apartheid was reaching a breaking point. France's intelligence service bombed the Greenpeace flagship ship Rainbow Warrior in Auckland Harbour, killing a photographer. Let's see, an expedition discovered the wreck of the Titanic. Yuppie culture was at its zenith. The Cosby Show was the colossus of American television. All of this hasn't turned out too well in the years since, has it? But, we included premieres of shows such as The Golden Girls and MacGyver. Growing Pains and Moonlighting all came out in 1985. American households, on average, had their televisions switched on for over 7 hours per day. So home computers the internet hadn't taken over yet. People weren't staring at these tiny screens that they could store in their pockets. But the family TV was on for 7 hours a day, which seemed pretty bad at the time. But, it was a one-way communications medium and probably not as bad as the grip that social media has on our attention these days. Approximately 11 million VCRs were sold in the US in 1985, so they were starting to take off, home video, but really that hadn't penetrated the market as much as you would think. It would be the following years where that would take place. The AIDS crisis reached a turning point. Rock Hudson announced his diagnosis. So we had the AIDS crisis, we had starvation in Africa, and the crack cocaine epidemic in the cities in New York and San Francisco and things like that in the US. And finally, to top it all off, the ozone hole was discovered. It seems like a lot for 1 year. Comparing it to 2026, was it a worse year? We don't remember it as being a bad year, do we? We look back at 1985 with rose-coloured glasses, but a lot of shit went down, let's just say. Now, it's probably time to dive into some movies. Now, what I've done in the past is I've tried to go through and pick the movies in real time as it was, as I was recording the podcast. I don't think that works too well. It is a little bit stressful. What I've done is I've actually gone through and selected my 8 movies already. But before I announce what they are, let's just go and have a look at what kinds of movies there were around at the time. So I might have a look at the top movies in the US in the year 1985. We watched all of these last year in the movies of 1985, but let's just go through Back to the Future, an all-time classic, one of the best movies of all time as far as I'm concerned. So well put together, that movie. It was, the number one movie of 1985 without a doubt. But what else was released that year? The Breakfast Club, After Hours, which I really enjoyed. The Goonies, Clue, very, very funny movie. Brazil. Really enjoyed Brazil when we watched it last year. I gave it 5 stars. I've waxed and waned on and off throughout the years, but I think it's just really, really good commentary on bureaucracy and how it can take over. Rocky IV, I think the first movie I went to see with my mates at 13 years old, took a bus into Fremantle to watch that. Mishima, A Life in 4 Chapters about the Japanese director. The Color Purple. A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, To Live and Die in LA. And Pee-wee's Big Adventure. I still haven't watched it. Don't plan on watching it this month. Witness was really, really good. The Harrison Ford movie. Commando with Arnie. Rambo, First Blood Part 2. Friday the 13th, Part 5. Weird Science. The Black Cauldron. Out of Africa. St. Elmo's Fire. Return to Oz. A View to a Kill. Teen Wolf, Better Off Dead, Desperately Seeking Susan, Lost in America, Kiss of the Spider Woman, The Pale Rider, Fletch, Ladyhawke, European Vacation, Cocoon, Real Genius, Smooth Talk, Runaway Train, Silverado, Mask. Just so many classic movies that we watched last year. The Last Dragon I remember watching on video when I was a kid. Brewster's Millions, The Sure Thing. Just on and on. Police Academy 2, Prizzi's Honor, Ghoulies, A Chorus Line, Red Sonja. So many movies in 1985. Now, if we go through and have a look at the top movies in 1985, sorted by rating. Now, this is what you have to do on Letterboxd, and it is a little bit weird because a lot of movies don't actually show you their rating when you're viewing them because not enough users have given them a rating. But when you sort by rating, you actually get, they are sorted by the rating that they would have, even though they don't show you the rating, the average rating, if you know what I mean. So it's an interesting way of surfacing movies that have a big, like a small fan base, I guess, surfacing interesting movies. Now, if you look at the link that I've included in the show notes, I've got a count of 4,624 movies, and that count will change over time as Letterboxd adds more movies and so forth, but that comes out to be, I think, 257 pages of movies. So if we go to page 257, or maybe 258, well, no, it's even more than that, 259. Okay, so if we go to page 259, we can see the really bad movies, the ones where a lot of people have given them a very low rating. There's movies such as Wizards of the Lost Kingdom, which is from Argentina. It's an Argentina-USA co-production. There's pretty much no information about that at all. But, it's basically, I think what you find at the time is that a lot of European movies, back in 1970 and 1975, the European movies were really, really interesting. And they were doing things that were quite different to Hollywood. And we talked in earlier episodes about how the modern American rating system hadn't, taken hold yet. So there was this old-fashioned censorship happening in the USA. So European movies were quite different to American movies. These days, in 1985, what you're seeing European movies trying to imitate Hollywood movies and trying to make movies that would appeal to Hollywood and would appeal to American audiences. And you see a lot of these European movies creeping up in 1985, which is most unfortunate. So, there's fewer movies that are sort of doing something interesting, I find. But yeah, just a lot of these bad sort of creature or space movies. Jim Carter is there as well, which is the gym-based kung fu movie, which is kind of a cult classic for a lot of people. People give it 5 stars because it does have that cult aspect to it. But, I'm not interested in watching any of those for the movies of for this month's movies. But let's go to page 1, the number 1 highest rated movie, if you look at audience ratings, is The Elephant in the Room. It's a movie from Russia called Come and See. It's a war movie, and I'm going to have to watch it. And I really don't want to watch it, but I'll have to add that one to my list. If you just look at these reviews, it's 5-star review after 5-star review. But the reviews say things like, and I didn't choose it last year for this reason. I don't really want to watch it. It's a little bit like having to watch that Studio Ghibli movie, Grave of the Fireflies. It's just going to be incredibly depressing. The first review, as soon as this film ended, I went and registered or enlisted in the US Army. No child will ever suffer like this again under my watch. Okay, that's a 5-star review. The next 5-star review, grim and bleak, brutal honesty, not an experience I can recommend, unbelievably disturbing. The next review, what a horrible nightmare. It is really this bad, sickening, up there with some of the greatest war pictures. 5-star review, worst movie I've ever seen. Okay. What the heck is this nightmare? Yeah, it's going on the list. but it's not a movie that I want to watch. So let's keep on going through the list. So that's Come and See. So yeah, the great movies I've already seen as part of the movies of 1985. There's one called The Ballad of Sexual Dependency, which gets lots of 5-star reviews. It's 43 minutes long. I don't think it's a feature film. So some of these creep in. There's one called Showa, which is a 566-minute documentary, which looks like it's more of a TV series. Again, something about war. So I'll skip over these aren't really feature releases. Vagabond. Now, that was an amazing movie that I saw in 1985, Angel's Egg. So I've already seen all of these, but let's just go through some more. The Official Story looks interesting. Now, this is a movie from Argentina, I think. Yes, and it's the last days of the military dictatorship. A high school teacher begins to ask uncomfortable questions about the dark origins of Gaby, her adopted daughter. So that's going on the list. What else have we got? Purple Rose of Cairo we saw last year. My Life as a Dog, that was really good, but again, we saw last year. So it's hard, it's sort of picking the bottom of the barrel. So a Z02 Noughts, I didn't see that last year. Now let's have a look. That's a Peter Greenaway movie, very stylistic director, but I found it very difficult to watch The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, Her Lover when I was a teenager, probably back in the 90s. A Z02 Noughts, I will add that to the list. Identical twin zoologists lose their wives in a car crash caused by a white swan, and they become obsessed with death and decay. Okay, going on the list. Sounds crazy. The next one is called Obi Obar, The End of Civilization. The world has been ravaged by nuclear war. The planet is frozen and radiation kills anyone that ventures outside of the dome. Okay, that sounds suitably sci-fi or dystopian, so let's add that to the list. There's Perrin Barber. So that involves a hot air balloon by the looks of it. A fairy tale about an old lady who takes care of snow and Jacob who does not fear death. Sounds suitably weird. Let's add that to the list. Night on the Galactic Railroad, a Japanese animation. So we'll add that to the list. It looks interesting enough. What else have we got? This one looks really good. I love the cover. The Black Cannon Incident. A mining engineer acts as a technical translator and is suspected of industrial espionage after sending a telegram that is intercepted by a militant snoop. So that's a Chinese movie. Let's add that to the list. What else? So just going through, Crime Wave looks interesting. This is a movie from Canada. Now, I think there's two movies from 1985 called Crime Wave. This is the highest rated one. So it is about a young director intent on making the greatest color crime movie ever. So we don't get many Canadian movies. Let's add that to the list. Let's see. Nothing's really jumping out, but I'm having to filter these through the 52 movies that I already saw last year, so it's a little bit hard. Some interesting covers, but a lot of these are movies that I've already seen. So let me just go through the ones that I already did see. The ones that I already did choose, just not to waste too much more time. So we'll just go through on to my watch list for 1985. So the ones that I decided not to see, so Perrin Barber, Night on the Galactic Railroad, Crime Wave, I've mentioned. There's another movie called Dim Sum, A Little Bit of Heart, which is an American-Chinese movie. It's by the director that did The Joy Luck Club. So this one is called Dim Sum, A Little Bit of Heart. Now, it looks quite interesting, but again, it's not the kind of movie that really flips my switch. I'll probably get around to it eventually. Another movie that sort of caught my eye was called Fandango, directed by Kevin Reynolds, and with Steven Spielberg as producer, I believe. It's an Amblin Entertainment movie. I think Spielberg tried to remove his name from this movie. It's a very 80s movie. I have a very vague memory of seeing it. So it's Kevin Costner and Judd Nelson on a road trip movie, something to do with the Vietnam War. I remember seeing it on VHS, probably in 1986 or 1987, when my parents were having a get-together. Basically what families used to do back at the time. Everyone would go over someone's house. The parents would play cards and drink, and the kids would watch a couple of movies on VHS and then fall asleep and maybe have some pizza. I remember this movie because I think someone's accidentally killed, and I based a high school English assignment on this movie, I believe. So Fandango. I want to get around to watching it again. The other movie that popped up is a movie called The History of White People in America, which is directed by Harry Shearer of Spinal Tap and The Simpsons fame, and it's presented very deadpan by Martin Mull. And Martin Mull is Colonel Mustard from the Clue movie in 1985. So that's an interesting time capsule movie, but again, it's only 47 minutes long, so it's more of a television thing, isn't it? But let's go and have a look at the ones that I actually selected for 1985, and then we'll have a quick break and we'll talk about them. So if I go over to my list for the movies of happenstance, and what you can do is you can filter that by year. So I'll filter that by 1985. And the movies that I selected to watch, the 8 movies that I selected to watch, I've mentioned some of them already. The Official Story, The Black Cannon Incident, O.B.O. Bar, The End of Civilization, Come and See, Z02 Noughts, The Time to Live and The Time to Die, which is a movie from Taiwan, The Time to Live and The Time to Die. And then the final 2 to round out the 8, Phenomena, which is an Italian movie starring Jennifer Connelly, all filmed in English, even though it's Italian, because, once again, it's European movies trying to appeal to an American audience or trying to appeal to Hollywood sensibilities. That's about a young girl with telekinesis. I think she can control insects. And finally, Enemy Mine by Wolfgang Petersen. Again, another example of a European movie, in this case a German movie, starring Dennis Quaid. You get an American actor, you make the movie in Europe, and you appeal to an American audience. Now, Wolfgang Petersen, of course, is well known as the director of Neverending Story. I quite liked Neverending Story when I was a teenager. He also did movies like Das Boot, Air Force One, A Perfect Storm, Troy, In the Line of Fire, Outbreak, and so on and so forth. But Enemy Mine is a movie that I've never seen. It's a movie that I shortlisted for the movies of 1985 last year, but I decided not to watch. But I think it would be an interesting one to watch in the wake of Project Hail Mary, because it is about a friendship between an earthling and an alien to sort of help each other survive. So I've added that to the list. So that rounds out the 8 movies. So let's have a quick break and then we'll get watching. Alrighty, so just a quick rundown. I'm going to give you the titles of the movies in the order that I watched them. So the first one I watched was Enemy Mine, then Phenomena, then The Time to Live and The Time to Die, that Taiwanese movie. Z02 Noughts came next, Peter Greenaway, then The Black Cannon Incident, The Official Story, O.B.O. Bar, The End of Civilization, and the one that I was putting off, The Elephant in the Room, my final movie for this month, Come and See, the movie from the USSR. So let's begin with Enemy Mine. Now this, it kind of came across as a bit of a kid's movie, actually. So it's based on Barry B. Longyear's Hugo and Nebula award-winning 1979 novella, and it's directed by Wolfgang Petersen, so it is a USA West Germany co-production. It's about a human fighter pilot played by Dennis Quaid and an alien Drac soldier played by Louis or Louis Gossett Jr., they crash land on a hostile planet and must overcome mutual hatred to survive. Essentially a Robinson Crusoe tale. Now, it did remind me a bit of Project Hail Mary, which I love and I'd recently seen. It has absolutely amazing sets, these massive sets that they constructed. Oh, that was just my dog. I've got to let him out. Sorry about that. I often forget that my dog is sleeping at my feet as I record these podcasts. The sets were absolutely amazing. Now, Wolfgang Petersen had come off Das Boot and The Neverending Story. And what happened is he was subbed in to take over from director Richard Longcrane, who had started shooting the movie in Iceland and Budapest with a budget of $18 million. But the studio shut it down after 3 weeks due to creative differences. And Wolfgang Petersen came in, scrapped everything, redesigned everything, and moved production to Munich. And, the movie does look a bit like Neverending Story. It has that Wolfgang Petersen look. It does look very 80s in that sense. Louis Gossett Jr. gives an amazing performance as Drac and does this crazy, gargling, throaty voice. And apparently the studio, it's called Enemy Mine, and I'm sure we all know what that means, but apparently the studio thought that people wouldn't understand it, so they literally had one of the subplots is that the enemy has a literal mine. Like an underground mine. Like it just doesn't make sense. It's kind of crazy. The makeup effects are quite good. It's one of those movies that I think that if I had seen it as a kid, it would have been a bit of a family favorite. But watching it for the first time at my age, it didn't really interest me that much. I'm going to give it 3 stars, which is really my threshold for watching a movie. I really don't want to watch anything that's under 3 stars. I would prefer if everything was 3.5 stars up. 7 out of 10, 70% is kind of the watermark. So it is unfortunate that it's a 3-star movie. It does take a bit of a twist halfway through when, the plot changes a little bit. I don't want to spoil it too much, but I will spoil it. Basically the alien Drac dies and has a baby. You think I think they don't have different male and females on their planet. It's just like a snail having a baby or something. So basically the human has to look after the alien baby. Anyway, not a great movie by my standards, but things dropped down a little bit in the watching the next movie, Phenomena, which is the Jennifer Connelly movie. Now, I think probably my mistake is I selected this movie because of Jennifer Connelly. It's her very first role, or her first leading role. She was only 14 years old. She plays an insect-loving daughter of a famous movie star sent to a Swiss boarding school called the Richard Wagner Academy for Girls, where the students are being murdered by a serial killer. So this is an example of the Italian genre of giallo movies, which we saw earlier this year when we watched The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. That was either 1970 or 1975. I can't remember. But basically, the genre of movie is that there's a serial killer going around. They are motivated by the fact that they are just insane. And they wear black gloves and a black fedora hat. And they stab people to death just at random. That's it. That's the genre. Kind of crazy. Donald Pleasance co-stars as a wheelchair-bound Scottish forensic entomologist, which is kind of crazy. So he loves his insects and she can sort of commune with insects, and they have a few interesting scenes together. But it is generally just crazy movie. I'm giving it 2.5 stars. It does also involve a trained chimpanzee, which bit off one of Jennifer Connelly's fingers during filming, as chimpanzees want to do. I had no idea that Jennifer Connelly has one of the ends of her fingers bitten off because of what I'm sorry to laugh about that, but this is just crazy, isn't it? It has an eclectic soundtrack featuring Motorhead, the goth band Sex Gang Children, Iron Maiden's Flesh of the Blade. It is just like, oh, who made this movie and why? I guess I am glad that I watched it because it is so out there. Phenomena, and a girl that can control insects with a mind and uses that power to catch a serial killer with a chimpanzee and a wheelchair-bound entomologist. It is insane. Peak 1985 Italian cinema, I think. The next movie I watched was The Time to Live. So did I say that was 2.5 stars? So that really is the low point. That is the lowest rated movie this year so far. I probably shouldn't have chosen it, but it was kind of crazy and interesting in a crazy way. The next movie I watched was a Taiwanese movie. Sorry, The Time to Live, Dario Argento. Did I mention the director of Phenomena? I didn't, so there you go. The Time to Live and the Time to Die is a Taiwanese movie. It's a semi-autobiographical masterpiece, a coming-of-age movie, part of a trilogy between A Summer at Grandpa's and Dust in the Wind. Sorry about that notification noise if you just heard it. So it follows a character called Aha, which is quite interesting because we heard Take On Me, but Aha is a childhood nickname for the director Hsiao-hsien, and I can't pronounce his name, sorry about that. And it's all about their relocation from mainland China to Taiwan during the Chinese Civil War, shot in the director's actual home village. And the voiceover is by the director himself. The entire cast is, almost the entire cast is non-professional actors, and it takes a very fly-on-the-wall look at his childhood, which I found quite fascinating. It has won a lot of awards. Basically, it's just this unhurried realism documentary style of childhood in Taiwan of this displaced Chinese family. Interesting to see how Japanese it looks, because, of course, Taiwan was a Japanese province back in the 50s or something like that, wasn't it? So all of the architecture and the food and stuff like that, it feels very Japanese. They live in a Japanese-style house. You know, one of these wooden houses that is built off the ground and has tatami mat floors and sliding paper doors. Very interesting movie. I'm giving it 3.5 stars. It's a movie that I'm glad that I watched, and I would recommend that you watch if you're in the mood for one of these, slow-paced, fly-on-the-wall, documentary-style movies. The next movie I watched was called A Z and Two Noughts. A Z and Two Noughts, of course, spells out ZOO or Zoo. And the Z and Two Noughts are the names of the characters. So twin zoologists named Oswald and Oliver Juice. So they are the Noughts. They lose their wives in a car crash and they become fascinated. The car crash is caused by a white swan distracting the driver, and they become fascinated by death and decay. And they start filming, they start making stop motion animations of animals decaying, including a white swan and a crocodile and a zebra and a dog, I think. It's quite disgusting to watch these, maggots eat these animals in stop motion. You can imagine, it's all sped up, like watching a flower blooming, but in reverse. And yeah, it's like, what on earth is happening with this movie? A lot of the shots in this movie are references to paintings by Vermeer. So almost every shot is composed as a Vermeer tableau. And there's, I think the first decomposing thing that we see is an apple, then we see a prawn. And how he got a dead zebra, I don't know, or a crocodile, or a white swan. But really, it's like, what is Peter Greenaway doing? It's not really a movie that you watch for enjoyment. It is really art house. Now, he does compose beautiful shots, and the shots, they don't really flip my switch. They are very symmetrical. He is a fan of symmetry and lighting, and it reminds me of that American director that I don't like very much at all either, because it is unnatural in a way when a shot is composed with perfect symmetry. David Cronenberg was inspired by this movie to make Dead Ringers, which is a similar movie, also about twins. It does star real-life twin brothers. There's a lot of male full-frontal nudity, which Peter Greenaway goes in for quite a bit. And there's, a survivor of the car crash. The driver who survives becomes fascinated with amputation and voluntarily gets her legs amputated as part of this movie. It is, reviewers call it more boring than a retrospective devoted to television weather forecasts. I gave it 3 out of 5. It is a curiosity at best, I would say. Weird movie. The next movie I watched is called The Black Cannon Incident. That's Huang Jianxin, a Chinese director. And this is a biting satire of Chinese Communist Party bureaucracy. I find it really fascinating. And I would say that this movie, The Black Cannon Incident, could almost be paired with Brazil, which was a movie that I loved from 1985. This is a really interesting movie about engineers. There's a Chinese engineer and a German engineer who is visiting China, and you see that China is sort of opening up to the West, and they need assistance to build these big works projects. And in this case, the project is something to do with a mine and heavy equipment for mining. Of course, China needs a lot of natural resources in the expansion that they're going through. And you've got this German engineer that's coming over to help them build stuff to sort of kickstart their economy. And you've got this Chinese engineer who can speak German, so acts as a translator, but not just a translator, a technical translator, someone who understands what is being talked about, all of this technical engineering stuff. Because it turns out that a lot of words can be translated in very different ways depending on whether it's what the application of that word is. So the Black Cannon Incident, the Black Cannon can mean multiple different things. So it can mean like a weapon, or it can mean a chess piece. And we're talking about Chinese chess here, not Western style chess. So it's like Chinese checkers almost. So it's this game. Now this Chinese engineer, he loves puzzles and loves games, as all us engineers do, right? We love puzzle solving. So he loves playing Chinese chess, but he loses the Black Cannon piece. And he writes a telegram saying that he's lost it and needs to find it, and asking for a meeting with somebody. But party officials intercept this telegram, which seems as if it's been written in code. And they launch a full-scale espionage investigation into this poor Chinese engineer who's just doing his best working on this engineering project. He gets blacklisted and can no longer work on the engineering project. So they bring in another German-speaking Chinese person who doesn't know anything about engineering. And he starts causing all of these problems because when the German engineer asks for bearings, he mistranslates it as bullets, and someone goes off and spends a whole day tracking down bullets and brings a supply of bullets to him. So there's all these mistranslations causing the engineering project to go off the rails. And you can see that it's the Chinese party, the Communist Party, working against themselves. This bureaucracy that they have and these investigations that they launch into their own people ends up just hobbling this big engineering project that they are working on with the Germans. Now, you can imagine that this would have been a difficult movie to get past the censors back in the day, and it was. So it's amazing that it even got made in a way. But it ended up getting past the censors, and it was a massive commercial success in China. I think it was kind of shining a light on some of what was happening in China at the time. I love the way that this is filmed as well. It looks a bit Kubrick. It looks futuristic in a way. It doesn't look 1980s necessarily. It looks like it's out of time almost. And there is it is reminiscent of Metropolis or 1984 or Brazil. The boardroom has a massive clock on the wall and all sorts of things. I really liked that. It was screened at the Cannes Film Festival out of competition in 1987. So I think it took 2 years for it to get released outside of China. But it turns out that the director went on to make a lot of state-sanctioned propaganda films, such as a film called The Founding of the Republic, which is quite interesting because this movie was walking the line, really, between, what would be censored and what would be okay to release, and criticizing, in a very subtle way, I suppose, just by showing the outcome of some of these bureaucratic decisions, but criticizing what the party was doing in China. I found it fascinating. I'm giving it 4 stars out of 5. I really enjoyed this one. After the previous 4 movies, which were just walking the line between 2.5, 3.5 stars, this movie is really, really good by comparison. So I enjoyed it quite a lot. And this continued to the next movie, which is called The Official Story, and is also, in a sense, about bureaucracy. This is a movie from Argentina, directed by Luis Puenzo, and is the first Latin American film to win the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. Now, the performances in this movie are just amazing. Everybody in the cast is just at the top of their game. These are the best of the best actors from Argentina. And even though it's not in English, it is just heartbreaking. It is such a tragic story. But also, this movie is about this young girl who's only 5 years old. Her name is Gabby, and is played so well by this actress, Anelia Castro. And this is her only role. Apparently, she was playing a 5-year-old child. Apparently, she was younger than that at the time of filming, which is just amazing. It is beautifully shot, this movie. The woman in the movie is a high school teacher, I was going to say English teacher. She's not teaching English, but she is teaching the equivalent of an English class, talking about poetry and novels and things like that, but with a rowdy class of teenaged boys, which she manages to control. Her husband is, fairly high up in the government and has done very, very well for himself. Now, this is during the final days of a military dictatorship in 1983. This is a 1985 movie. So again, this is a movie that is being made about history as it is happening, and is being made a little bit guerrilla style because there were death threats made during filming, to the point where the director, Luis Puenzo, had to announce that they have stopped filming, but then he continued filming in secret to get the movie made, because it was making commentary about what was currently happening. about how people were profiteering from other people's misery and so forth. So this woman who has an adopted daughter called Gaby, her husband is doing quite well and is being criticized by his brother and his father, who are suffering. How is it that all of the evil people are doing well and you also are doing well? So there's this family barbecue where all of this comes to a head, and it is just performed so well. The father of the family is really, really old. He must be in his 90s, I would say, and he passed away quite soon after making this movie. But he was an absolute legend of Argentinian stage and screen, and I don't have his name to hand, but you've got to see this movie. It is so, so interesting, so tragic, so well performed by everybody across the board, including this tiny 4 or 5-year-old young girl who sings a famous song. It's a famous Argentinian children's song whose title takes on a double meaning. It's called In the Land of I Don't Remember. And the movie ends with her singing this song over the telephone to her adopted mother and father. But of course, the story at the heart of this is that young children were taken away from their real parents. Their real parents were jailed or maybe executed. And then the children were given to families who were part of this military dictatorship, I suppose. So a tragic story. I'm giving it 4.5 stars. It is really, really good, the official story. The next movie I saw was directed by Peter Szulkin from Poland. Now, Poland, this is a Polish movie. It's called Obi Oba, The End of Civilization. It is the third film in an unofficial apocalyptic tetralogy by this director. So he made 4 movies. It looks very much like Brazil. It looks a bit like a Terry Gilliam movie, or a bit like Blade Runner, or maybe like Bad Boy Bubby or something like that. It is set in an underground, or not underground, it's on the top of a mountain, but it's set in a bunker. It's a crumbling bunker after a nuclear war, or maybe it is underground at the bottom of a mountain, but it's survivors of a nuclear war who cling to a belief that a mythical ark is going to come to rescue them. Of course, there's no such thing. It's just this religion almost that they develop as they start to go crazy. There's only a few thousand of them. The lead actor is a bit reminiscent of Tom Hardy. I liked all the Steadicam in this movie. It puts you into the shoes of somebody who's living in these underground bunkers, just trying to survive. And it turns out that everybody is just eating these hard biscuits, and you find out that they are made from all the books that they are pulping, so that they lose knowledge about the world of before, if you know what I mean. So they're pulping up all of these books and forming them into these hard tack biscuits that people survive on. And of course, there's no ark coming to rescue anybody, so it's completely bleak. Fantastic cinematography, fantastic production design. Story's okay. It's I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. But compared to the previous movie, the official story, the Argentinian movie, this Polish movie, even though the actors are apparently well-known Polish actors, the performances, and even though they're not speaking English, you can tell that the performances are very wooden. They're not fantastic performances. You don't get a sense of this being a realistic struggle for survival. It is just a very stylistic, lots of neon or fluoro, I should say, lots of fluoro lights, a lot of concrete, a lot of bald people in drab clothing, but not fantastic. Interesting in the sense that it does echo a lot of other movies that have these similar sorts of themes at the time, like 1984 and Brazil and so forth. but just not to the same level of The Official Story, which is probably one of my top picks. So The Official Story, The Black Cannon Incident, and the next movie, of course, the final one on the list, come and see this war movie from the Soviet Union, directed by Elem Klimov, the last movie that he ever made. This is his peak, and he just couldn't follow it. He just retired from film directing after making this. Widely considered to be the greatest anti-war movie ever, this follows a 14-year-old Belarusian boy, his name's Fyodor, through the Nazi occupation of Belarus, or Belorussia, during World War II. I went in so nervous. I did not want to watch this movie. I read recently an article where people were talking about what is the movie that's been on their watch list for the longest, and they just can't bring themselves to watch. And this was at the top. This was the movie that everybody's got on their watch list and nobody wants to see. I went in thinking it was going to be like Grave of the Fireflies, and it is. It is. It's absolutely tragic. The first thing I noticed is it looks like it's in 4:3 aspect ratio, and all the movies in 1985 are widescreen, and this is in 4:3. It's beautifully shot. It's all shot on film, and it looks amazing, but it's not widescreen, and it's like, why isn't it widescreen? Now, this was a real deliberate choice by the director, and it's not quite 4:3. It's the 1.37:1 Academy ratio, which is almost 4:3. Now, this is the aspect ratio that movies used to use. It's the silent movie era framing, and movies right up until the 50s would have used this aspect ratio, but then they went into widescreen partly to compete with television, to give them, this big sweeping cinematic viewpoint, these widescreen movies. So all the Western movies and things like that, where, that showed these amazing landscapes, they all used the widescreen format. So why did the director go back to using this Academy ratio, this almost 4:3 ratio? And the reason is it forces you, there's no escape for your eyes. There's no escape for what you're watching. You can't sort of look at the edges of the frame. You're trapped. All of the characters and you're, as the audience, your vision, you're trapped at looking into the center of the image. So when I'm looking at this on my modern widescreen monitor, I've got black bars on the right and left and right hand sides. And you're forced to look at the center of the image, and all of the framing, so many shots of this movie is a character with their face full in the frame, staring directly back at you. So they break the fourth wall all the time. The character is just staring right back at the audience, often staring with a very tragic look on their face. They are crying, or they look just absolutely shell-shocked. And this 14-year-old boy, Fyodor, he goes through a transformation in this movie where he looks 100 years old by the end. He's aged 100 years by the end of this movie, and he's just looking absolutely shell-shocked directly at you, and there's no escaping his gaze. So this was a very deliberate choice. The director did not want to treat this movie as a spectacle like Apocalypse Now or Lawrence of Arabia, or later on we've seen war movies from Spielberg, Saving Private Ryan and things like that make it a spectacle, like a cinematic widescreen movie. No, he wants to treat this as what it is. It's a message about the horrors of war. And basically, come and see. It's a line from the Bible, from, Revelations, come and see the horrors of man, basically. And, don't repeat these mistakes. Now, this is all about the Nazis in Belarus going into these villages out in the middle of nowhere, these little farming villages, and basically razing them to the ground. And, the second half of the movie, the first half of the movie is the boy leaves his home village, enlists to fight. He has twin sisters who are maybe 4 or 5 years old and a mother who doesn't want him to leave. And he enlists in the army, but of course, when they go off to battle, he's the new recruit, one of the older, very elderly soldiers. His boots are falling apart, so he takes the boots of the new recruit. The new recruit now doesn't have any boots, so he is left to guard their camp. Guard in quotation marks, because basically what's happened is they have taken pity on him and they don't want this 14-year-old boy to come and start fighting in the war. So he becomes one of the leftovers who starts wandering around, goes back to his village to find that everyone's disappeared. Of course, everyone's been executed. We see that. We glimpse that in the background. He never sees the pile of bodies of his mother and sisters, but because he believes that they've evacuated to an island. So he and a young girl team up together to try and find his family on the island, but he then ends up falling in with a couple of other leftovers, I guess, of the war, who then go and try and perform a little bit of guerrilla warfare against the Nazis. Unsuccessfully, they end up being captured after going through a few horrific experiences, and they end up getting trapped in a barn that the Nazis basically petrol bomb and burn to the ground to kill everyone alive. But this young boy does manage to escape. One of the most horrific moments is where he has captured a cow and is taking this cow, and of course a cow would be a prized possession people can eat, and, everyone's starving. But he's caught in a firefight between the resistance and the Nazis, and it's at dusk, and the sun is setting, and they're at the top of a hill, and it's just the boy and the cow, and of course, presumably, the cinematographer and cameraman who are, have this handheld camera. And the firefight is real. They are shooting real tracer bullets, real tracer rounds. It looks amazing, but so dangerous. How this young boy was not killed is just incredible. But what is shocking and disgusting as a modern viewer, and we've seen this again and again in movies from the 70s and 80s where animals are tortured and killed on screen. We've seen this in multiple of the movies. They shoot with live rounds. They shoot this poor cow, and it takes minutes to die. Now, of course, at the time, the director, he was making a point about human suffering, but to kill an animal and to have it suffer through minutes and minutes until it dies, while the boy is holding the rope, I don't know how he wasn't killed. The bullets, you can see the tracer bullets going, a foot over his head. Absolutely insane that they filmed it. Tragic that they killed this cow. It's like a gut punch when you watch it. And, his intent with killing this poor animal, it does affect you. And I guess that it has the effect that the director intended. And, talking about slaughtering animals for food and how many millions of cows must be slaughtered every year to feed the world. And this one cow that was killed and suffered in agony for a couple of minutes to make this point for this movie. But I don't know, people can debate that. It was one of the shocking parts of this movie, but this movie is filled with shocking parts. And it ends, the ending of this movie is crazy. And at the very end, this boy has escaped the Nazis, and he has found, he goes trying to find survivors. He finds a couple of bandages. He's trying to find survivors, and he finds a framed photograph of Hitler in a puddle, and he manages to get a machine gun. And he looks at this photograph of Hitler, and you see his face, and he's just absolutely shell-shocked. And he starts just unleashing. So it's a little bit like that Tarantino movie, Inglourious Bastards, which is a bit of revenge porn. against Hitler, isn't it? And apparently the director wanted to call this movie Kill Hitler, but he ended up changing the title, I think, Come and See. I think maybe this was the Soviet censors that forced him to change the title. But he fought the censors for 8 years to get this movie released. So this movie was shot in chronological order. It did use live animation. The title did come from the Book of Revelation. When they screened it, it had 2.9 million viewers in the Soviet Union. Ambulances had to be parked outside of cinemas to take away overwhelmed viewers. It's his final film. He died in 2003. It was not accepted as a nominee for the Oscars. I don't know why. He'd shot all his previous films in widescreen. So the reason why he chose this Academy framing is because the ironic grandeur would work against the intimacy. So this film, it was chosen for intimacy. You're just staring back at these characters. So I think you can tell it's had quite an impact on me. I didn't finish the story of what happens. So what happens at the very end is he just unleashes his machine gun into this portrait of Hitler. And then we start seeing all of the atrocities that the Germans, like archival footage. We start seeing archival footage of German atrocities, which is horrible. You know, you don't want to have to watch it. And showing Hitler right at the end of his life. And it starts rewinding. Over time, we see Hitler becoming younger, shows a bit of archival footage, cuts back to this young 14-year-old boy, and he unleashes another round of machine gun fire into Hitler's portrait. And then we cut back to the archival footage and it's rewinding. And we see Hitler as he's getting younger and younger. And then we cut back to the boy, he shoots the portrait again. And then more archival footage, he's getting younger and younger. His earlier days, when he's just starting to give rally speeches. And then cut back to the boy, he unleashes machine gun fire again. And then we go back to, I guess, the First World War. And when Hitler's very young, we just see photographs of him in uniform and stuff like that. And then we go back and the young boy still unleashes. And then we rewind all the way back to when the last photo is Hitler on his mother's knee as a newborn baby. And then we cut back to the boy and the boy pauses for a moment and then he can't do it. He cannot shoot the baby Hitler. And that's where the movie ends. So crazy, crazy movie. It has affected me emotionally. It was a tough watch. I wouldn't recommend that you watch this one, but it's 5 stars. And with that being said, that's the last movie. Come and see the last movie for 1985. What a way to round things off. What a way to round off the movies of 1985, eh? So sorry for getting a bit emotional there, but it's just one of those movies. We are going to watch the movies from 1990 next month. That will be different, won't it? Until we do that, let's think about what a horrible place the world can be, both in 2026 and in 1945 and in 1985. With what we talk about, the AIDS crisis, we talk about the crack cocaine epidemic, terrorism, war, all sorts of horrible things, and of course, starvation in Ethiopia. So with that said, let's listen to the song that has to cap things off for this year.
There comes the time when we heed a certain call, when the world must come together as one. There are people dying. Oh, when it's time to lend a hand to life, the greatest gift of all. We can't go on pretending day by day that someone somewhere will soon make a change. We all a part of God's great big family. And the truth, you know, love is all we